It's go time.
Welcome to the Third Down Gamble podcast with your hosts, Don Charbin and Heath Graham. Winnipeg quarterback Zach Collaros discusses the Blue Bombers' effort versus the Rough Riders and what it means going forward.
Just have to do a better job of executing the plays. That's it. Kind of the same stuff we say every week. Try to play our brand of football and execute at a high level. If you left that game, or if you left some of the games and the way we played this year without a sense of urgency or without a little bit of anger, then I think you're wrong. But yeah, there's always plays left out there that had the potential to score, to make drives longer, all those things. So if you're a competitive person, there's always things that you think about in games and kind of stick with you. It's a lack of execution, sometimes by one person, sometimes by multiple people, honing in on the details. If we get to cut back on what we're doing or add more, we have to figure out that sweet spot, right? Honing in on those little things, making sure you're addressing those the team with yourself individually, and then trying your best to fix the mistakes that you make and move forward next. I think belief is a big thing, and just believe in each other. And again, with the understanding that we have been here before. We have executed at a high level before.
I think Zach Collaros summed it up well, that we won, but we didn't look good doing it, and you could tell this is the day after. The Bombers are sort of soul searching here. What happened? How is it that essentially a depleted offense in Saskatchewan, defense was more or less together, but if there was a few starters that weren't there. So the Rough Riders weren't sending their A group, and yet it took a penalty on a first field goal attempt to run more time off the clock for the Bombers so they could kick the winning field goal. Anything to concern about, or you just think it's an off night?
There's a saying that they don't ask how, they just ask how many. And when you're counting wins and losses, that's a great philosophy and a great attitude to have. And it's perfectly fine during the first half of the season, even game 12, 13. When you're getting to game 17 or 18 in the season and you win like that, there is more concern. There is more questions about the how. For this Blue Bombers team, with a playoff spot still in limbo, had they lost this game, Edmonton would have still had a chance to supplant them. There was a lack of urgency all around, and it was pretty discouraging to watch, right from Trey Vauvel fumbling the opening snap to Demario Houston then taking a really bad pass interference call where all he had to do was turn around and he probably would have had an interception, led to a immediate touchdown by the Rough Riders. The Bombers were in chase mode the rest of the night, but they weren't showing that passion and that urgency to really lock down a playoff spot. If I'm the Blue Bombers, I am concerned. And there are some holes in this team from watching the CFL for years. You get into the playoffs and you've got a chance. But right now, for the Bombers to get to their sixth straight Grey Cup game, it is a big uphill climb.
And that climb most likely will head through the East. We'll get into that in third down. But I kind of agree with you that the Blue Bombers, after that Hamilton game, and I suggested this before, that as Zach Collaros goes week to week to week, his numbers go down, down, down. We saw it again against Saskatchewan. Now, Vauvel's opening kickoff fumble didn't help the Blue Bombers by any stretch. But when the Riders went away from all the way down to Jack Cohn, I should say, when the Riders went down to Jack Cohn in the fourth quarter, you kind of thought, okay, here's the Bombers. They can go down. They can just take over this game, and away they go. But they didn't do anything. And it was a last drive, aided by penalty, yes, but it was a last drive that finally got them the win. And that should have been a team that you would have thought would have been desperate to win, because granted, Edmonton had a tough road to go along themselves, but you don't want to leave that door open.
You don't. And Trey Vauvel, in his defense, he did make up a lot for that fumble. He had a couple of key returns late in the game that really helped the Bombers put together that winning field goal drive. And he flipped field position numerous times in the Bombers' favor when he got an opportunity. There was some awesome coffin corner kicking performance by the Saskatchewan Rough Riders as well that pinned the Bombers deep. The biggest fault right now, and this is something that the Bombers have had as their number one strength over the past 5 seasons, the play of the offensive and defensive lines. They built this success on having the best offensive line and defensive lines in the league. That has clearly fallen off, especially at the offensive line positions. And we're seeing Zach Collaros' performance suffer as well. We can also talk about his arm strength and decision-making on some of the deep passes that he's thrown. When you're feeling that pressure because the offensive line isn't giving you the protection that you're used to, that's where you see a big decline as well.
And Zach Collaros talked about how important belief systems are when it comes to winning, and especially when this team has struggled in the last 2 weeks, and what is the confidence level? And he said it's based on belief. Do you trust that you can do this? I won't argue that, but there are some physical limitations, as you note, that seem to be catching up, that the offensive line is getting older, they're getting tired. And Zach Collaros himself, in that football game, he got beat up. There were many times when I thought he would go to the sideline and that would be it. He is going to be out of this football game. He just looked like a man that had just been through the ringer and had come out the other side not loving it.
You look at the changes in the offensive line over the years, and one of the highest rated offensive linemen in the league right now is Jamarcus Hardrick with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who for a number of years was that right tackle for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. You lose him, some other holes open up, and as you mentioned, the age of Patrick Neufeld and Stanley Bryant, they're not that same dominant force they were. Zach Collaros, also an aging quarterback. He's north of 35 years old at this point as well. Those things do start to add up. You put together a long 17, 18 game grind when you're not getting that protection. And I'm sure Zach is beat up a lot more than he has been, especially you look at the 2021, 2022 seasons when that offensive line was dominant. He was hardly getting touched in some games, and that's certainly not the case in 2025.
The 2021 Blue Bomber team, especially defensively, was probably one of the strongest of all time. And they had enough offense to complement it and win their second straight Grey Cup. Granted, there was a hiccup of 2020 in between where nobody played. That seems to be a touch point for a lot of the concern with the Blue Bombers, is back in those 21-22 years, this was a dominant team, great offense. But Buck Pierce now is over in BC, and they almost rode him out after the Grey Cup performance last year, putting it on him as if he had something to do with the way the Bombers couldn't get it done against the Argonauts, and especially in that fourth quarter. But remember, Zach Collaros had a split hand. The overall effect of this, I think, is shaking the core down a little bit. And if there's a seed of doubt flowing through that organization, it's going to lead us to our next question. Why aren't the head coach and the general manager signed as of yet? Why does the Blue Bomber brass like to wait until the end of the season with their contracts up to try to re-sign everybody?
This has been ongoing throughout the entirety of the Kyle Walters, Wade Miller, Mike O'Shea era in Winnipeg. I don't know if it's the people being offered the contract or the people offering the contract, but it just seems to be the status quo for them as they wait. Mike O'Shea really likes to focus on the task at hand and not worry about that contract stuff until after the season is over. Kyle Walters, I know, was disappointed in the communication last time before his current 2-year contract was offered to him, in that they let the previous contract wane. He was left in the lurch until he did up a new deal. Interesting contrast to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, where even with a year left on their contracts, Jeremy O'Day and head coach Corey Mace have been extended. Different philosophies from those two organizations. It seems to have been working in the past, certainly for the Blue Bombers, and in the present for the Roughriders.
It seems as though Wade Miller, and I don't know what the climate is in those offices. Is everybody getting along? Are they feeling that they're all on the same page? There have been a lot of rumblings over the years that these guys are getting tired of each other. They've been working in the same building for a long time, and sometimes you just need a change to refresh everything. Does that mean that Kyle Walters is out as general manager? I don't know that he, given what the team has done over the last 5 years, deserves to be booted, or Mike O'Shea. But Mike O'Shea is a very different duck to begin with. He sort of walks to his own beat, and not having a contract extension doesn't seem to faze him in the least. He's very confident in himself, and he trusts what he can bring. And let's face it, if he is a free agent at the end, there's probably an Ottawa team that would love to tap his shoulder and say, come on over. We don't mind having you.
You're right. Every great coach in professional sports eventually runs their course with the team that they've had the most success with. Mike O'Shea is already the winningest head coach in Winnipeg Blue Bombers history. He's got 2 Grey Cup championships. He's won several division titles. The accolades go on and on with what he has accomplished. But is that message starting to fade or lose its enthusiasm a little bit? It very well could be. And you look at the backward step that the team has made as a whole this year. There's a lot of discourse about offensive coordinator Jason Hogan and his performance in running that offense. But does he have the horses in front of him to be able to run a successful offense? Does that fall on Kyle Walters? All those questions start to appear when there's cracks in the armor.
Free agency, they went after James Vaughters and Jarrett Stearns. Those were the 2 biggest signings that they had, one on O, one on D. But they didn't do a heck of a lot else. They were fairly quiet. And you could say, okay, maybe they've got the horses to begin with. They didn't have to tweak too much. Or you could say they're aging. We've got to start rebuilding. And what are we doing for the future? Now, 2025 is huge for the Bombers. They host the Grey Cup. They want to be in that football game, but they're going to have to do it from the road. There's no way around that. The most likely scenario, I would think, is that if this team, let's say, gets wiped out in the semifinal, that one of the 2 is going to be gone. You look at the Rough Riders, yes, they did extend each of their coach and general manager for another 2 years. They're signed on through 2028. The Montreal Alouettes did the same thing. Danny Machocha and Jason Moss have been extended. Machocha through 29, Moss through 28. That's a vote of confidence. And I kind of like when ownership groups say, look, you've been doing well. And it's not just this year. It's been for the past few. I think we can merit our decision by saying, look, these people are good. We need to hang on to them.
If you look at the Rough Rider situation, the Craig Dickinson era, the failure to win games after Labor Day really set back the Saskatchewan Rough Riders. Corey Mace is only in his 2nd season as the head coach. And what a turnaround for that organization. They got into the playoffs last year. They won a game. They've clinched first place in the West this year. I completely understand and endorse the extension on his contract after even such a short amount of time. Jeremy O'Day took a lot of heat during the Craig Dickinson era as well, and there were people calling for his dismissal. The offensive line was in shambles. How could a guy that was a former lineman let things like this happen? You want to talk about shambles, you look at what happened to the offensive line last year. They had 13 different guys start a game for the Rough Riders on offensive line. They held it together, and credit to Logan Ferland for really leading that offensive line on the field. It was Jeremy O'Day that found those 13 guys that suited up for the Rough Riders. Now that things are trending right, suddenly Jeremy O'Day is the guy for the future.
Greg Reynolds always believed in Jeremy O'Day, and Jeremy O'Day around the league, if you talk to other general managers or you talk to the league office, he's well respected. He is one of the guys that he knows the game. He understands what needs to be. And to be fair to Jeremy O'Day, the problem with his drafting of offensive linemen is that they wound up in the NFL. He had that happen multiple times where his number 1 pick went to the NFL and didn't come back. Is that a fault or is that genius? You know what to find. You just hope that the NFL doesn't see it as well.
That's a great point. And if we look at the Alouettes, Danny Machocha and Jason Moss getting extensions, what a great redemption story for Jason Moss coming to Montreal. It was kind of a perfect storm where he went to a team that was in a bit of shambles. Nobody was sure of ownership. Nobody was sure if players wanted to sign there. Danny Machocha was a calming force to help navigate, and they put Jason Moss at the helm as the head coach. They won a Grey Cup right away, and they have been in contention every year since. This is a fantastic fit for both of these gentlemen in that organization, and great to see them being rewarded with contract extensions. I
wonder if the Elks kind of wonder if they should have been a little bit more patient with Jason Moss. After all, he had a pretty good football team that, granted, they didn't do anything in 2019, the year he was let go, but on the whole, he seemed to be very passionate about what he was doing, and the team had given the Calgary Stampeders, the dominant team of the time, a good run for their money. Hindsight's a beautiful thing. Going to Saskatchewan as an old coordinator, it seemed to sort of get him under the radar, get his mojo working for him again, and the Alouettes came knocking. And of course, let's not forget that Machocha was his head coach when Moss was the quarterback in Edmonton some 20 years ago. There's a long history, a lot of trust between the two. And Moss, like him or not, Moss is a good head coach. He's intense. He's verbally strong at times with the officiating, but he really believes in his players, and they know that.
Very true. I like what you said about the trust and the comfort with Danny Machocha and Jason Moss as well. And you talk about building a successful organization, and you want to be surrounded by people that you know and that you trust. It's why head coaches in new situations bring in their own coaching staff and coordinators. It's people that they are familiar with, that they're comfortable with, or people that maybe they don't have that close working relationship, but they respect the job that person does, and they want them to be a part of that organization. The Alouettes, and we'll get into this in a little bit here as well, but what a find of Davis Alexander as their number one quarterback, taking a risk in trading away Cody Fajardo from the team to anoint Davis Alexander as the number one guy. But obviously, Machocha and Moss saw something in him, and it is paying off.
Now, speaking of Davis Alexander, we can talk about how long do you want to play your quarterback when the games maybe don't mean so much. Now, for Davis Alexander in Ottawa, that game meant something. First place was still on the line with the Montreal Alouettes, but he got beat up early by that Red Blacks team. And I want to give William Fields all the credit in the world. With nothing on the line, that defense played stellar for Ottawa, and they've been getting better all year. I hope whoever comes in next recognizes the ability that is William Fields. I think he is a great defensive coordinator. Davis Alexander gets beat up in the first quarter, a little bit in the second, but they keep him clean after that. But he is favoring that arm, that throwing arm. That's seemed to be either his bicep or his elbow, one of the two, that was really aggravated. Let's go to the Calgary Stampeders, though. And with the score 35-7, Vernon Adams Jr. is still out in the third quarter, late in the third quarter, running the offense, and he gets sacked, gets twisted awkwardly, and comes up limping with about 3.5 minutes to go in that quarter. That game was out of reach. There was nothing left to prove, and yet he was still out there.
Both of these games had a lot on the line. They're coming into week 18. There are still playoff positions. The 6 teams are locked in, but who plays where, who hosts what, is still up in the air, other than the Saskatchewan Roughriders clinching first place in the West. So there was a lot of merit in having your starting quarterback in these games. Scary for the Alouettes to see Davis Alexander with potential arm injuries. He got rocked pretty good, and fortunately it looks like he is going to be okay, but that had to be some pretty frightening scenes from the sideline when you saw that happen. On the other side, 100% Vernon Adams should have been pulled. They've got a 4-score lead at that point. What are you trying to prove? Unless the Argonauts orchestrated some amazing comeback to narrow the gap and you could put him back in late in the fourth quarter to kind of close it out, there's no reason to have Vernon Adams still in that game and risk those types of injuries. We're seeing the Riders had Trevor Harris as the third man on the depth chart in that game. As much as they still wanted to beat the Bombers, they recognize their playoff success is hitched to what Trevor Harris is able to do. They wanted to keep him healthy. This week coming up, it's going to be really interesting. I think there's dominoes that fall with the results of each game as the weekend progresses, and we'll see what decisions teams make later on in the weekend, especially those Saturday games.
Toronto was down to their third string starting quarterback. Jarrett Doege was in charge of that offense, and he was getting rocked by that Calgary defense. And there was very little that the Argos could do to get down the field. They had kicked a couple of field goals, and that was about it. Calgary was in control. And if I'm Dave Dickenson, am I not paying attention to the clock? Am I not seeing that score and how much time is left in the game? Doing some mental math. But at that moment in time, especially it was 2nd and 9, Argos are going to blitz, call a play that just hands the ball off and gets you out of trouble. I didn't understand why Dickinson, and maybe this is a bit of, hey, you're a quarterback, you got to be able to tough it out attitude. I don't know. He certainly took a lot of hits playing quarterback when he was with the Stampeders and the Lions and his tour with San Diego in the NFL. Just because you did doesn't mean he has to. And this is a slighter person. He's smaller. And he's had this problem with his hip for a while, his lower back. Be careful with him.
100%. And the list of injuries that Vernon Adams has suffered through is lengthy. He's had leg injuries as well. He had a knee almost completely blown out in a game against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He came back from that. The Stampeders have been the surprise team in the CFL this year. And a lot of that has been the defense early in the season. Vernon Adams, when he is on, is an exciting player to watch. And you want to make sure that you have him available to you at as near to perfect health as can be come playoff time.
Speaking of quarterbacks, as we continue on this journey, let's go up the road on Highway 2 to Edmonton. And what is the future for Trey Ford? A point-blank question-ish to Mark Killam about what is going to happen with Trey Ford. And he said, yeah, he still has a future in the CFL. What was that supposed to mean? Is Trey Ford on the trading block, the chopping block in Edmonton?
It was a cryptic message that indicates to me that Mark Killam doesn't believe the Edmonton Elks are the future with Trey Ford. Trey Ford has given a lot to this organization as well through some pretty tough times. He was the quarterback with the 500 record as the starter. Things didn't play out as he had hoped to start this season. The change to Cody Fajardo sparked the Elks to a lot of success later on this season as well. You look at Cody Fajardo, he was a guy that thought he was maybe almost out of the league before he went to Montreal and won a Grey Cup. I agree it's not the end of the road for Trey Ford. There are some concerns as to whether or not he's an effective number one guy. Yes, the wins and losses record was decent prior to this year, but he wasn't blowing teams away with his arm. To have a player of his athletic scope, you really need to cater an offense around what he does well. So it's not necessarily a traditional pocket passer. You have to be a bit more creative on what you do with him. He's got 2 more years on this contract with the Elks right now. We know in the CFL, nothing's really guaranteed. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens. I'm assuming they would like to trade him and get some assets back as opposed to just terminating the contract and cutting him loose. But where is that fit? What team is willing to take on somebody that doesn't fit that traditional mold?
And who wants to eat that contract to bring him along? He's getting starting money as a backup. And I don't think a lot of teams are excited about that. Somewhere there would have to be some change to allow for that to fit into the salary cap. So if you're, let's say, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, for argument, and you wanted to bring him along because Zach Collaros announces this after the Grey Cup that he's done. That's it. He's not coming back. Who do you want to be your starting quarterback? Do you want it to be Strevler or Ford? And if you decide to go with Strevler, do you want to pay Ford starting money? And those are the types of questions. And you can go to Ottawa, you can go anywhere. For teams, that's a lot of coin to be tied up in a guy that may hold a clipboard. You can't really do that in the CFL. You have to have value attached to that. Now, you talk about Ford and winning, and yes, and what he is unconventional and off script. He reminds me a little bit of Damon Allen, Tracy Ham, Doug Flutie even, where guys that would move around in that pocket and just have different launch points, different attack points down the field. But he kept his eye up. He kept looking for people to put the ball to down the field to score touchdowns, etc. And he beat the Rough Riders in Saskatchewan. His one Achilles heel obviously was the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But beyond that, for the most part, Trey Ford could be very strong against any team that he played. They started slow this year, and I think a lot of that had to do with the defense and the fact that they hadn't come around. But they point to the offense saying, you're not scoring enough. to compensate for the defense, and he gets the blame for it.
Maybe a bit unfair. And you mentioned Doug Flutie, Tracy Ham, Damon Allen. I don't know if there's been more exciting quarterbacks in the league to watch than those three. That was a time, an era when those guys were at the top of their game. There were some great passing quarterbacks as well. You look at Matt Dunnigan, you look at Kent Austin, Danny McManus, but the excitement that Damon Allen brought to the table when he rolled out, or the scrambling ability of Doug Flutie, got people out of their seats. And as I said, if you've got an offensive coordinator and a head coach that understand that style of quarterback play, you can build an offense around them, and you can get an offensive line that'll move things around. You'll let them get out of the pocket and find guys down the field, and it can create a lot of exciting big time plays. I don't know if any coordinator in the league right now is willing to do that. You look at maybe what Nathan Rourke does in BC, a little bit of that style as well. He had a 70-yard touchdown run in last week's game. So that's another guy that's willing to get out there and run and does some amazing things. But you really have to buy in and believe in what he's going to bring as that number one guy to give him that opportunity.
Couldn't agree more. Consider this, though. It seems to me that offensive coordinators, and there's always a lot of cues between the two leagues, the CFL and NFL, but they want to keep their quarterbacks in the pocket. They want them to, this is sort of a throwback to traditional thinking, that I've got certain sets of offensive calls that I want you to instinctively know. You do your checks and you know where that ball has to go based on the defense that you see. But if you're out running around, are you making those same reads, or are you inventing as you go? And a lot of offensive coordinators, especially if there's an interception or something like that, really don't want that to look bad on them because it wasn't called. So they want their quarterbacks to follow what they've been told to do. And Trey Ford likes to get out and ad lib.
Yes, it creates some turnovers, but it also creates some amazing highlight reel touchdowns.
Well, I think back to that one in Toronto a couple of years ago where it looked like 6 different Argos had a chance at him, and he still threw the touchdown pass. Look at the rally that he had against the Hamilton Tiger Cats last year, where he almost single-handedly brought the Elks all the way back against a very big deficit that was facing them in the fourth quarter. He took Javon Leake and made him a star. I don't know if I'm Edmonton, if I want to necessarily pass on him and say, look, it was great to have you, thanks, but your future's elsewhere. Not sure that that's what they're saying, but the intimation is they want to really look hard at Cody Fajardo and see if he will remain as their starter. Fajardo is a little non-committal right now because of family concerns, but if they can convince him to stay and they have to pony up some more money to do this, then you're not going to pay two of them the same rate.
This is Andrew Hoskins of the Turf District Podcast, and you're listening to the Third Down Gamble Pod.
Kicking off week 20 action, we saw the third matchup of the season between the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. As mentioned in First Down, the lackluster Bombers held on with a last-second field goal to pull off a 17-16 win against the resting Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Resting is a very interesting statement. The Roughriders, yes, they did not bring their starting quarterback. They did. But Trevor Harris was rostered as the number 3 quarterback for the Roughriders that night, never did see the field. And Saskatchewan overall, if you look at Jake Mayer, they were very explosive on their first turn with the football, getting a long touchdown. After that, they seemed to be more settled into a groove and really didn't want to, I don't know how to put this, get too crazy with what they were doing on offense.
And neither team went too crazy on offense. You look at the passing totals, 182 yards for Zach Collaros, 15 of 24 with a touchdown and an interception. Jake Mayer goes 15 for 20. Great completion percentage of 75% for 123 yards. Jack Cohn came in relief. 2 completions on 8 attempts for another 38 yards. So 182 versus 161 yards passing. Rushing totals aren't much better. The Riders muster 29 rushing yards. The Bombers 107. So not really exciting, explosive plays on offense in this one.
We almost felt in that fourth quarter that the field was starting to tilt, and Winnipeg, who had really not shown much, should be taking the assertive role in this game and going and taking it and winning it. Despite good field position, and you mentioned Trey Vauvel getting big kick returns to set them up on short fields, they just refuse to do anything. Now, Jason Hogan has taken a ton of heat over how this offense was playing. He was missing Nick Dembski. That's a huge part of their offense. Whether or not he is catching more than one ball a game, he's a threat to do a lot of different things for them.
He is, and with him out of the lineup and Dalton Schoen gone for the season, you're relying on some exciting but less proven receivers in Pokey Wilson, Carrick Wheatfall, etc. Jareth Stearns, he's a sure-handed guy. He makes some good plays here and there, but especially Nick Dembski and to some degree Dalton Schoen, those are the guys that are the comfort zone for Zach Collaros and allows him to have confidence in moving the ball down the field.
And for the Rough Riders, they went into this game trying not to get hurt, I guess, is the best way to describe it. Of course, they did open the door for Winnipeg to get into the playoffs, and they may have to face each other again. But they seem to be content with that. The fact that they went in to Winnipeg earlier in the season and beat them. And if they do play Winnipeg again, it's going to be one of two scenarios most likely. It's either they meet Winnipeg in the Grey Cup or they meet Winnipeg in the West Final. But I just wonder, too, if the Winnipeg fan base, even though they're going to support their Blue Bombers right to the end, are starting to get a little bit leery of what's going on.
I don't think anybody, players, coaches, or fans were happy with that win. It's, as I said earlier, it's not how, it's how many. But this late in the season, you start to want to see that playoff caliber performance, and that was sorely lacking. Interesting stat of the night as well. Sergio Castillo, 3 of 3 on field goals. His total yardage on those field goals was 57 yards. He's kicked some from 60, a single field goal this season. So 3 field goals that don't even add up to that. A pretty easy night of chip shots for him. Brett Lothar, 3 of 4 with a long of 42 yards. That miss resulted in a 62-yard return by Trey Vauvel, completely flipping the field and taking points off the board for the Riders, which could have made a difference in this one.
And Lowther barely missed that kick once again. If he's going to miss it, he misses it by the slimmest of margins. If you look at that situation, Winnipeg then has to score a touchdown to win the game, not a field goal if Lowther makes it. But it doesn't happen. The Riders, overall, they didn't seem to be too upset. They were certainly happy with the way their defense played. Certainly happy that the quarterbacks that they put on the field gave a reasonable account of themselves. Jake Mayer, granted, he didn't look flashy, but he got the job done. Jack Cohn got some much-needed experience.
He did, and we haven't seen a lot of Jack Cohn on the field. He's been with the Riders for a couple of years now, so great to see him get some meaningful snaps. I'm sure he would like to have performed better than a 25% completion rate, but he got in the game, and he did throw a 30-yard completion as well, which is no small feat. Mitchell Picton really came alive late in this game, 5 catches for 71 yards, and including that 30-yarder from Jack Cohn. Really important, again, to see those role players stepping up, and Mitchell Picton is somebody that the Riders have to feel pretty good about heading into the playoffs.
Joe Robustelli got injured, and that's why Picton was out there a lot more. It's, again, injuries. That's what scare you going into the playoffs. The late game, the BC Lions hosted the Edmonton Elks. The Elks, who have struggled mightily against the BC Lions in the last few years, came out strong, had a halftime tie of 10-10 with the Lions, but that third quarter went away, and the Lions scored 27 second-half points and beat the Elks 37-24 in front of a huge crowd at BC Place. At
this point, if I had a vote, I would put Nathan Rourke number 1 for that most outstanding player in the CFL award this season, and most outstanding Canadian. I'm never a fan of voting for one or the other. If you've got a Canadian player that has done phenomenal things, they deserve both awards. We saw that with Brady Oliveira last year. I believe we should see that this year with Nathan Rourke. 21 of 32 for 338 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and a 70-yard rushing touchdown for Nathan Rourke. This is the superstar caliber play that we were expecting to see when Rourke came back last year. He's got this full season under his belt now, and he is making the most of it.
For Cody Fajardo, 19 of 34, 230, 3 interceptions, though, with a touchdown pass mixed in. Justin Rankin was held back. A total of 71 yards between rushing and receiving. And that Lions defense that we had kind of maligned for a while, wondering if they were ever going to step up, they've stepped up in the last few games. They have really served notice that they are ready to go into the playoffs. The Lions, Nathan Rourke also had 82 yards rushing, 70 of those on one play, and he outran Terrell Ford into the end zone.
He did, and we see the type of athlete Nathan Rourke is. A phenomenal athlete. He ran away from Tyrell Ford, which is not easy to do. I think Ford is one of the fastest DBs in the league. So for Rourke to be able to outrun him like he did shows that he's got some breakaway speed as well.
James Butler goes 15 carries for 82, and Xander Horvath, who had pretty much a season average of 10 yards a carry, 2 attempts for 3 yards, a 1.5 yard average. I think that's going to bring his stat line way down.
But if you look at total yards of each touch, he did have 1 catch for a 40-yard gain as well. So he's making up for it in the lack of running. He made up for it in the receiving game.
And Keon Hatcher, wow, he's also making a case for being MOP, but unfortunately, I think his quarterback's going to get the vote. Five catches on 9 targets, 97 yards, a touchdown, long of 33, but a 19.4 yard average. Justin McInnes, 5 catches, 96 yards, 19.2 yard average. And then Aiden Eberhard, who had only 2 catches, but 49 yards in total, 24 and a half. The Lions were just chucking the ball down the field and really being mean to that Edmonton secondary as they sliced and diced them.
With this loss, the Elks are officially eliminated from playoff contention, but you have to take a lot of positives with what Edmonton has done this season compared to the previous. There's a lot to be hopeful for, and I think this Elks team is moving in the right direction. They've extended Justin Rankin, rightfully so. I think this is a team that can make some noise in the West for the next couple of seasons for sure.
The Elks showed marked improvement. You could argue that, well, what have they done standings wise? They're the same. They could be the same record as they were last year, 7-11, depending on what happens in the final weekend. But there's something different about this team where last year with Trey Ford, they started to pull it together, but they made the coaching change. They made a lot of other changes, GM, and it's going to take time for it to gel. And we saw here in the back half of the season, they were the thing that really killed the Elks season were those 2 last play losses against Toronto and Hamilton. If they hold on and win, what are the Elks this weekend going into the final showdown?
Moving to Saturday, the return match saw the Montreal Alouettes in Ottawa to take on the Red Blacks. Another great crowd for Ottawa, despite their dismal home record. Almost 21,000 in attendance. The Alouettes pulled away in the second half. 39-28 was the final. Tyree Adams got the start for the Red Blacks and had a bit of an up and down night.
It was the first time he'd started in 2 years, and that was that devastating knee injury that he suffered against the Edmonton Elks that had put him on the shelf for such a long time. It was great to see him back on the field, and I thought he gave a great account of himself. The Alouettes started strong, went after the Red Blacks, but by halftime it was 16-10. It seemed like Adams had settled down, but then again, the Alouettes in that third quarter just kept pouring on the pressure, and the Red Blacks, who made it interesting at the end with a short kick, touchdown, seemed like they could really do something about this result, then had the next short kick picked off by the Alouettes, and they set up a field goal to wrap up the game.
Tyree Adams, as you mentioned, in that first start in a couple of seasons, 27 for 44, 286 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 picks. And you look at quarterbacks, sometimes you get that first start and you catch lightning in a bottle. You don't know where it's going to go. Other times it takes a little bit to build a solid career. I think that Tyree Adams, given the circumstances that he came into, had a pretty decent night. I'm sure there's mistakes with those 3 interceptions that he's going to want to clean up, but he could be a quarterback of the future somewhere in the CFL. Davis Alexander now wins his 11th consecutive start at the beginning of his career. 21 for 31, 328 yards and 2 touchdowns. A great showing for Alexander. Avoided serious injury, although he did get beat up a little bit. The Alouettes have to be feeling pretty good about themselves now that they've got a lot of these guys back healthy and are ready for a playoff run.
And Austin Mack seems to be the rediscovered receiver with this Alouette offense, a guy who had tried out with the NFL, came back to the CFL late last year, stayed with the Alouettes, signed again. He's made moves to bring his family with him. Still wasn't getting numbers until these last couple of weeks. And all of a sudden now he's back in the playbook almost. 5 catches on 8 targets, 108 yards, a long of 44, and of course a touchdown. Tyler Snead had a great night. 7 catches, 114 yards, and a long of 37. The Alouettes have so many weapons receiving. When Tyson Philpott doesn't have a catch and you still throw for 328, that tells you how deep they are.
And of course, this was the week that I took Tyson Philpott in fantasy. So thank you for that, Davis Alexander. But you mentioned the weapons, and Charleston Rambo is a guy that doesn't get targeted a lot, but makes some pretty impressive things happen. 2 catches on 3 targets. He had a touchdown and 34 yards as well. So they did do a good job of spreading that ball around. Braylon Addison, top receiver for the Red Blacks, 5 catches for 78 yards. And they spread the ball around as well. 9 different players were targeted in this one, 8 of them with a catch.
I'm really curious to see what Tyree Adams now does in his next game, because you get that game behind you, things will slowly start to ease up in terms of the nerves and the anxiety over having a start in a big game. He's going to be playing the Tiger Cats. It should be a great opportunity on the road to really flex and show the Red Blacks that maybe he's the one that they need to keep. It's between him and Dustin Crum. I'd imagine they're not going to pay them both. Of the games of the weekend, this one to me was the most entertaining. The Rough Riders and Blue Bombers were certainly close throughout, and there was that tension built all the way through. But this game here, it had everything.
Closing out the weekend, maybe not quite as exciting of a game, but lots of points on the board for the Calgary Stampeders. The Argonauts rolled into town and the Stampeders took it to them. 44-13 was your final in this one.
The Stampeders were up 28-7 at halftime, 38-7 after 3 quarters. They were never threatened. A good crowd in Calgary watching the Stampeders basically keep their hopes of second place alive. We'll get into that in the next down. The Stampeders, just their defense looked fantastic. Of course, Adrian Green with a pick 6 to start things off. Really, for Toronto, it just seemed to get from bad to worse as the game went on.
Other than Vernon Adams, we saw some trips down the depth chart at quarterback for both of these teams. As we mentioned previously, Jarrett Dagey was 3rd on the depth chart at the beginning of the season, pressed into action, 15 of 19 for 119 yards. He got a little bit banged up. So we also saw Tucker Horn and Max Duggan for the Argonauts and Josh Love for the Calgary Stampeders. 5 of 8 for 67 yards for Love. Max Duggan actually came in and showed quite well, 13 of 16 for 109 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, Max Duggan of the quarterbacks for Toronto really seemed to show the best. It surprised me because I hadn't really seen much of him other than that one pass he thrown in Saskatchewan the week before. Toronto might have something here, that there may be their new 3rd-string quarterback. Jarrett Dagey has been through a lot. He, of course, guided the Argonauts to that win over the Elks. Liram Hairolahu, 2 of 4, and one of them that he missed looked like he was trying to hit the parking lot on the east side.
One of the breakout players of the league this year, Kevin Mittal for the Toronto Argonauts, 10 catches on 12 targets for 69 yards. He has put together a lot of impressive highlight reel catches and some really solid games this season as well. Sometimes when you get those guys that have been working their way up through the practice roster and you get those quarterbacks down the depth chart, they spend a lot of time working together, not running the number 1 offense. And Kevin Mittal has really found his niche.
And Jalen Philpott, 6 catches on 6 targets. His twin brother, Tyson, went 0 for 3 on targets. 98 yards, 50 was the long, a touchdown. And talk about efficiencies for Dominique Rhymes. 1 catch, 55 yards, and a touchdown.
A pretty good stat line for him. I'm sure he would like to see the ball more, but he made the most of that 1 catch.
And Damien Alford is starting to work his way back into this offense as well for the Stampeders. And remember how he torched the Rough Riders on that smoke delayed game way back in the summer. Alford, if the Stampeders get that crew together again, Vernon Adams Jr., if he's healthy, is going to have some fun with them going forward.
Third down.
Playoff scenarios are going to dictate a lot coming up in this final weekend of the regular season, week 21 in the Canadian Football League. In the West, this is the more muddled one. If BC wins, BC hosts Calgary, regardless of what happens the rest of the weekend. And that means Winnipeg is the crossover. If BC loses and both Calgary and Winnipeg win, Calgary will host Winnipeg and BC goes over in the crossover. If BC loses, Calgary wins, and Winnipeg loses, Calgary hosts BC, Winnipeg's in the crossover. And Winnipeg's going to be in the crossover the rest of these scenarios. If BC and Calgary both lose and Winnipeg wins, Calgary hosts BC. If Calgary and Winnipeg all lose, Calgary hosts BC. And through all of this, Winnipeg, 4 out of 5 scenarios, they are the crossover team. BC could finish second or in third or as the crossover, depending on how this all plays out. But if the Lions win against the Riders on Saturday, none of the rest of this matters.
Winnipeg cannot host a playoff game. That much is the given. Other than that, right now, things are pretty wide open for these 3 teams. A lot can happen. And as we talked about earlier, the dominoes will fall a lot to finalize. And if we look at what happens in the East, it's a lot simpler. Toronto and Ottawa are out. Hamilton still has the fate in their own hands. Win and they clinch first. Lose and Montreal wins. They flip-flop places and Montreal overtakes. If they both lose, Hamilton still hangs on to first place. Again, a key matchup in Game 1 against the Ottawa Red Blacks will decide how much the Alouettes force the issue when that game rolls around for them.
And by the time that Winnipeg plays Montreal on Saturday, they won't know what BC has done. So there's still going to be a lot of question marks. They'll know what Calgary's done, but Calgary beats them in every tiebreaker. They want the Lions to lose. So the BC-Saskatchewan game is still going to be significant. However, the East could be over if Hamilton beats Ottawa on Friday night. And Hamilton's a 14.5-point favorite.
They are. And I think if you look at these scenarios, I'm never one that wants to cheer for a certain outcome based on this team does this team does that. But for all the teams in the West, you got to think the better route to the Grey Cup for them is if BC ends up as the crossover in the East. And you've got Montreal and the BC Lions, 2 of the hottest teams in the league right now, facing off against each other to march their way through.
A lot of people want BC and Montreal to face off in the Grey Cup. If you get BC in the crossover, that ain't going to happen. One of those 2 isn't going to make the trip. Whew, this is going to be a lot of fun. BC, their head coach, Buck Pierce, talk about what they're going to do going into Regina. Regardless of anything, they are going there to win, and they are playing their starters. They want to finish second. They know winning gets them second. They don't have to worry about what Winnipeg does, what Calgary does. They have to win to do this because they'll be free and clear in the standings. If they wind up in ties, then BC has it over Calgary. Calgary has it over Winnipeg, but Calgary has it bigger over Winnipeg, 3 wins to none. BC has beaten Calgary twice. Winnipeg has beaten BC twice, so they'll saw off.
The first 2 games of the weekend really dictate what happens in the 3rd game and to some degree the 4th game. As you alluded to, the Ticats, 14.5-point favorites coming off the bye, hosting the Ottawa Red Blacks. Tyree Adams gave the Red Blacks a bit of a spark. This 14.5 seems pretty far-fetched to me. I'm taking the Red Blacks to cover the spread at least in this one, but if Hamilton wants to lock down first, this is a must-win game for them.
I'm with you completely on this. I don't understand what Hamilton has done in the last 3 weeks that makes you think they're going to take out the Red Blacks by that margin. It's probably Bob Dice's swan song, and I hope that he goes out and he has fun and he lets that team do what it wants to do, gamble on 3rd and 3, do things like that to make it exciting. 14.5, that's 2 touchdowns plus at home. I don't see it. Ottawa is just not that bad a football team.
I agree. I don't think the Red Blacks are going to lay down by any means in this one. The Ticats have to get things rolling for playoff time, and Bo Levi Mitchell has to get that offense back on track. 14.5 is a big spread, and I think the Ottawa Red Blacks can certainly keep it more competitive than that.
And the last time that Ottawa was in Hamilton, they lost by 3, 23-20. Now, granted, Drew Brown was the starting quarterback that day, but they gave up 10 points in the fourth quarter to lose the game. I don't see how Hamilton has changed that much, that result is going to be such a wild difference with Tyree Adams as their quarterback. And I do think that Tyree Adams is going to provide a spark for this football team. They've been through it already. They know they're out of the playoffs. They've played that game where they're kind of disappointed. But now this is the last time we're going to be together. Let's go out and make some noise and see what happens.
The second game of the Friday night doubleheader is meeting number 3 between the Calgary Stampeders and the Edmonton Elks. Edmonton eliminated from playoff contention. Calgary still trying to lock down second place in the West. The Stamps are a 4.5-point favorite going into Commonwealth.
Now, Edmonton is that team that last week found out that they're not going to be going to the party. What's their emotional state? What do they feel that they can do? The coaching staff is going to have a lot of work to get them motivated to play the Stampeders. The 2 teams split their first 2. So this is the rubber match. And in a perfect world, had everything fallen right for the Elks, this was the game that was going to get them into the playoffs. Unfortunately for them, Calgary won last week. They lost. That hope is now dashed. 4.5-point favorites for these Stampeders makes sense. It's barely more than a field goal. I kind of like that. Calgary's defense is going to be definitely as strong as they were against the Argonauts. Cody Fajardo took some hits against BC. Do we see Trey Ford at all in this game for the Elks to see if he has a future with this team?
We very well could. I'm taking the Stampeders minus the 4.5. I think they cover the spread. The Elks, again, you get to this point in the season, it's the last game. You're eliminated from contention. You're playing for your future. You want to make a good impression on that coaching staff. The fans have come around on this Elks team as well. There's a lot of positive momentum that they have. I'm sure they want to keep that. I think they keep it reasonably close, but the Stampeders have enough to play for that they win this one by a touchdown.
Comes down to the health of Vernon Adams Jr. Vernon Adams Jr. had better be healthy at the kickoff and at the end of the game for the Stampeders to cover that spread.
Kicking off Saturday, the Montreal Alouettes head to Winnipeg to take on the Blue Bombers. The home team is a 7.5-point favorite. We know what happened late in the season last year when these 2 teams met. There was a mighty wind that changed the outcome and allowed the Blue Bombers to clinch the West. The Alouettes, depending on what happens with the Hamilton Tiger Cats, may or may not have much to play for. And it looks like the odds makers are saying Hamilton wins, so Montreal has an opportunity to rest. 7.5 seems like a pretty big spread.
That was a mighty serendipitous wind because that came up just before Montreal had to punt. Oh, I don't think luck be on their side twice in a row. However, this really comes down to what does Montreal know about their situation. The Blue Bombers basically, win, lose, or draw, are kind of stuck. They could finish in 3rd place. And if they want to play in the West, depending on what happens with the BC Lions, but they won't know that result. Chris Streveler and Terry Wilson are taking a lot of snaps. And although Mike O'Shea is being a little discursive and saying, well, Zach Collaros doesn't need to really prove to me that he knows how to hand the ball off in practice. But it does make you wonder if Zach Collaros is a little more beat up than anyone's letting on. The Blue Bombers may not care if they go through the East or the West. They're just going to take what comes. You kind of know where you're going. You just want to figure out how to get there safely.
I like the Alouettes plus the 7.5. Given what we saw the Blue Bombers perform last week at home against the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the Riders had nothing really to play for. It went down to a last-second field goal. The Alouettes may or may not have much to play for. Even if they rest Davis Alexander, they've got McLeod Bethel-Thompson, who can put up some pretty impressive offensive numbers as well. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Bombers take the victory, but Montreal certainly will be within that 7.5. Shout out to those Winnipeg Blue Bomber fans. They are less than 500 tickets away from their 13th consecutive home sellout. It would be all 9 games this year, carrying over from 4 games last season as well. So the most supportive fans in the league based on attendance numbers continue to do it. And last game of the season, they're not going to see the Bombers back unless they make it back to that Grey Cup. This would be a great send-off to see that 13th consecutive full house.
Got to send congratulations to that Bomber fan base and to the Bombers for the marketing department too, to keep everybody motivated to come to the games. And the fact that they are on the verge of a 13th straight sellout, that's fantastic. That's great for the revenue streams, and that's great for the league to have a team doing so well. It's kind of a shining example of what could be for the other 8. And certainly we've seen an uptick in attendance all across the league, and the audience is getting younger, which is another thing that the CFL wants to see. I'll put it to you this way. If Hamilton wins, Montreal loses big. And if Hamilton loses, Montreal wins and covers.
Yeah, a lot of ifs. Like I said, there's dominoes falling from game 1 that dictate what happens the rest of the way down the run here.
And I don't see them risking Davis Alexander if the game doesn't mean anything.
Closing out the regular season with the Toronto Argonauts having the bye, the BC Lions head to Saskatchewan to take on the Rough Riders at Mosaic Stadium. The visiting Lions are a 7.5 point favorite. Odds makers thinking with first place wrapped up, the Riders aren't taking any chances, and maybe the Lions have something left to play for, determining whether they finish 2nd, 3rd, or 4th in the West.
They will. They determine their own fate, and this is how they do it. They win this football game. What has happened before doesn't make any difference if the Lions go out and beat the Rough Riders. But if they lose, then depending on those scenarios that I talked about as we kicked off this segment, they could be as far down as the crossover. I don't think that they want anything less than a home date in the Western semifinal and would love to have the Stampeders come to town. Nathan Rourke is within 80 yards of 5,000 passing yards for this season. No Canadian has done that ever. And this is a great opportunity for him to really cement his MOP status. The Buck Pierce wants this team to win. They want to prove to the league that they are ready. The defense is getting better. It seems to me like the Rough Riders are kind of in this stasis land, and we've seen it with the Blue Bombers years ago where they had first place and they were out and cooled, and they would play okay, but they would lose down the stretch because it didn't really matter to where their station was going into the playoffs.
I like the Lions to win this game. I do think there's enough fight in the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, regardless of who steps on the field, to keep it within a touchdown. I like the Lions to win, Rough Riders to beat the spread. And you talk about that magic 5,000 passing yard number. It's something that doesn't come along very often. And when it does, it's a special quarterback that gets there. Looking at the leaders of 5,000 yard single seasons, Anthony Calvillo did it a remarkable 7 times, Doug Flutie 6, Ricky Ray 4, Bo Levi Mitchell 4, Henry Burris and Michael Riley 3 apiece. What a list of quarterbacks in the CFL to have done this. Nathan Rourke, as you said, no Canadian has done it before. It's likely to happen in the first half in this game, I would suspect, given the receiving core that the BC Lions have, and a very special night for Nathan Rourke if he manages to get over that 5,000 yard barrier.
The incentive is there, and I know that the Lions are thinking about it. The second place, the 5,000 yards, they want to go into Saskatchewan and defeat the Rough Riders because in their minds, whether the Rough Riders are excited to play them or not, they want to be back there in a few weeks.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble Podcast. Audio worth watching.